Counselor Kevin Clark. Kevin, I'll pass it over to you and let you take over.
All right. So I am Kevin Clark, moderator for this candidate forum. We're joined today by Republican Dr. Randy Grellner, and you guys come on up, and Dr. Randy Grellner and Democrat Dr. Robin Fuxa, general election candidates for Oklahoma Senate District 21. A map showing the district boundaries is on the screens. Each candidate will have 90 seconds for opening and closing statements. I will ask prepared questions with the candidates alternating going first. They will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. We'll begin with an opening statement from Dr. Fuxa. You have 90 seconds.
Get my mic on. Hi, I am so glad to be here. I'm a fifth generation Oklahoman. My name is Dr. Robin Fuxa. I grew up in Chandler, Oklahoma, just down the road. And then just before my junior year of high school, we moved to Seminole, Oklahoma, where my dad was transferred with OG&E. And I graduated one of 28 from Strother High School. And so Oklahoma State University felt like a metropolis in comparison. But I found my forever home here. I've been here ever since 1996, with the 1 year that I taught in Bartlesville accepted. I have an elementary ed degree, and then I went on to earn my master's in literacy and school library media while I was teaching at Pawnee Public Schools. And then I earned my PhD in education as well, and went on to prepare teachers for 15 years at Oklahoma State. That's been an incredible joy, but it's also been a very frustrating process to see our education resources eroded by our state legislature, and then to see our teacher exodus explode on us. In the 11-12 school year, we had 32 emergency certifications. At the time of the walkout, we had 2,000. Now we have over 5,000. My family is here, where my husband is anyway, Barry. So I'm excited to have him here with me today. We've got two awesome kids, Emery, who's at Oklahoma State, and Carver, who's a fifth grader.
Grellner.
Yeah, well, Randy Grellner, and I go by Randy. I was born and raised out in western Oklahoma on a farm, wheat and cattle. And in 1984, I graduated high school. And I remember in January, my mom's pounding on a typewriter, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" She goes, "You boys are going to school. I have a twin brother," and sent us to OSU and Ag Econ. And we got a degree in Ag Econ. And there was no future in agriculture at that point in time, if anybody remembers the 80s. And so went into pharmaceutical sales after I got my degree, and then back to medical school. I took 80 hours at night while I worked full time in sciences. Went back to OSU medical school and graduated in 98, but really after residency, 2001, and I was on a ship to Cushing, which is where I wanted to go. I've married my wife, Shelly, and I've been married for almost 34 years. I married up, she married down, and we have two sons. But you know, the big thing in Senate District 21 is healthcare. It's definitely education, we know that. And it's agriculture, which is a huge staple, and oil and gas. And those are the things that I think are going to make this country and this state get back on track, is that we get oil and gas, agriculture back together, and we take care of the education system. So, thanks.
All right, Dr. Grellner, you get the first question.
Okay.
State question 833, which is on the November ballot, would add a new section to the state constitution allowing for the creation of public infrastructure districts within municipalities. A PID board of trustees would be able to organize public works projects funded by a special tax that would only affect properties within district boundaries. For a district to be created, there must be unanimous agreement among all the property owners in the proposed district area. Do you support or oppose state question 833?
Well, let's break it down first. I think we need to break it down and understand it first. So, you know, they're talking about big properties. They could be 10 acres, they could be 100 acres. But what they're after with these is building the infrastructure that municipalities and people on the city council would know. Municipalities don't have a whole lot of money, and things are tight. So they would put all this land in this district, they call it, and then all the property owners, they would take a bond out on it, just like a school. If we have a bond that comes up, they take 10 mils out of the land, and then that goes into this big fund, and then the developers or whoever can put infrastructure in. Now, when I was young And how it still happens for the most part is that a developer finds a nice piece of land, 10, 15 people go together, they build streets and roads, and then they sell off lots, okay? And so my concern with this is, and you know, people are on both sides of it, but my concern is that you get all this millage money in because the bonds are, you know, funded, and then the people that are in charge of that don't put a proper infrastructure in, and take extra money from that. The other thing is that there is, just like your taxes on your house, property tax, you have to pay that on that millage, the property owner there. So, thanks.
All right, Dr. Fuchs, the same question.
So this particular measure concerns me, and I'm going to vote no. The reason is there are a couple of reasons. Only 3 city councilors have to sign off on this, and it can be that all the property owners of that section can be one person. If somebody buys a section to develop infrastructure, we typically think of sewage, water, roads, those kinds of things that we need for a community to thrive and to work properly. But this could also be swimming pools and tennis courts for a luxury development. And so that all sounds great for that developer who might profit heavily from having passed that millage in that square mile, say, or whatever the square footage is. But the concern is then property owners, once those homes in that region are sold, their taxes will be higher. They'll be less likely to support things like school bonds, things like city needs that we need to develop genuine infrastructure. And so I am against this. It concerns me. I don't want folks to be reluctant to support school bonds. That's the only way the state of Oklahoma gets the school buildings we need. Our high school that's going to be put in 2026 in Stillwater was passed through a community bond that was essential. And so I don't want to move forward on anything that would cause folks to be reluctant there.
All right, Dr. Fuchs, this question 2 goes to you. State question 834, also on the November ballot, would add language to the state constitution clarifying that non-U.S. citizens may not vote in Oklahoma elections. This question will not fundamentally change state law, however, because it is already a felony for non-citizens to register to vote. However, it would embed this principle in the Constitution, making it almost impossible for the legislature to make a change in the future. Do you support or oppose State Question 834?
It's already a felony in the state of Oklahoma to attempt to vote or to try to register to vote if one is not a citizen of the United States. I'm against this measure for one primary reason. I do not like legislation that is written as a fear tactic to try to scare people or try to message something that is not correct. One already cannot vote in the state of Oklahoma if they're not a citizen. There's an effort to convince folks that that is happening in Oklahoma around the country. That's a disinformation campaign to undermine election confidence. And so I'm concerned about anything that tries to make that claim. We don't need a law about this because we already have a law about this. It's a felony. It can't get felonier.
Dr. Grellner, same question.
Yeah. Well, it probably is a moot point. I don't think it's a terrible idea to have this law passed, and I would definitely support it. I think the point of it is there are states in the union that are looking at allowing people to vote, giving them a driver's license. Then that ID gets ramped up to a voter's ID, and so those are the things that worry me. Is that we have people wanting to give credentialing, papers or credentialing documents to people that we have no idea who they are. They come through the southern border. My brother-in-law is a trooper, and I asked him about this, and I said, "What about driver's license?" He goes, "It doesn't matter what they give you. You don't know if it's right or not, right? You don't know who issued it." He said they all have documents from this place or that place, but he said you have to be very careful when you pull up on these people. So. I think that's the trend that's maybe they may be trying to stop, but I don't think there's any downside to passing this. And I think that if you're an American citizen, you should vote. If you don't have a felony or whatever, but if you're not an American citizen, you shouldn't. I mean, that does not seem hard to me, and I don't know why it is even an issue in this country, but it is in some states.
All right, Dr. Grellner, according to Attorney General Drummond in this very room several months ago, the current marijuana laws in Oklahoma have opened doors to organized crime. He indicates 40% of the marijuana consumed in New York City is illegally produced here, and this illegal industry activity has become involved in human trafficking, sex trafficking, and opioid distribution. How do you propose bringing this under control?
Well, I was against, obviously, recreational marijuana. I did forums on it. I put ads in the newspaper here in Stillwater personally, because I think it's so destructive. From a medical standpoint, these people come in, they're depressed, they're not going to school, a lot of the kids. The parents are losing their jobs. So we have to, opening the door to this was not a good idea, okay? So then how do you get rid of it? Well, we need to be inspecting. Our sheriff, from my standpoint, or concern, says he can't even go on to property that is owned by people if you can't go inspect it. So we need to have inspections and those kind of things. But it's 95% of the marijuana produced in Oklahoma ends up somewhere else. There's no way we could puff it all. I mean, we have 4 million people, right? And we're baling it up like round bales out in the middle of an alfalfa field. And so you'd have a hard time getting rid of this stuff. So that's what happens. It goes on the black market. And then California, they're having problems keeping their marijuana shops open because, all this is coming out there. And so the black market is getting, that's the way most people get marijuana. They don't go back through our shops and where we get all this interest and we get all this tax money for the state to go to schools. It didn't work out. So I think inspections, and I think make sure that law enforcement can have access.
All right, Dr. Fuxa.
So let's be really clear. We're not talking about legalized recreational marijuana. We're talking about medical marijuana, which is a really important distinction. Folks who are fighting cancer, folks who are terminally ill and have severe pain or nausea, those are legitimate uses for medical marijuana that we need to protect. This is a perfect example of the supermajority of our state not listening to the people of Oklahoma. People were asking to move away from mass incarceration over minor drug offenses for a long time. I think we can all agree that a 17-year-old kid who has a minor offense and then they have an 18-year-old possession charge for a tiny bit of weed for a joint doesn't need to be in prison for years and years. That's what the state of Oklahoma had been doing for quite some time. With State Question 781, the people said, we don't want to throw people in jail. We want to treat drug issues. We want to make sure that Oklahoma doesn't incarcerate at a higher rate than anywhere on the planet, particularly women. So those are some things we had to look at. So when the people moved forward a bill, was it perfect? No. But those were guardrails that should have been put in place by the legislature years ago. We have to crack down on organized crime of any kind. We have to make sure that our land is protected. We've got to make sure that we protect agriculture and make certain that organized crime is addressed. But these are two separate issues, and we can do them both.
All right, Dr. Fuchs, speaking of State Question 780, despite efforts to implement criminal justice reforms after voter approval of State Questions 780 and 781, Oklahoma still has high incarceration rates and is the highest in the nation for incarcerating women. What more, if anything, should be done to deal with this problem?
We need to fund State Question 781. It's there, but there's not nearly enough funding to make sure that people get the treatment they need, that people get mental health services that they need. The state of Oklahoma has a really poor track record in the last couple of decades at preventing problems for folks. That's what we've got to make sure we do, is provide mental health resources so that people can be well. Most people in the state of Oklahoma who are incarcerated, it's related to drugs. Most people whose children go into the foster care system, it's because of addiction. We've got to make sure that we address those problems at the root. The demand for fentanyl comes from extreme addiction across our state that is not being addressed. We absolutely have to make sure that we address the underlying issue, which is untreated addiction. We've got to treat it as the illness that it is and make sure that we provide the care that people need. It is an illness like any other, and we have to respect that.
All right, Dr. Grellner.
Yeah. Well, back to the marijuana right quick. If you don't think that 10%, 20% of the people in this state that have a medical license to get the marijuana, then you're not sitting in a doctor's office every day, because they're healthier than I am and they have their prescription. Now, there are needs for it, for seizures, those kind of things, but it's recreational in Oklahoma. And so the other thing is that when you look at, the criminal justice system is way too expensive. It's killing the state, and we need to go to a diversionary type system where we have veteran courts. We have people with mental health issues that have a court to go to, and drug court. We should have really a no tolerance though for violent offenders. We shouldn't be putting those out on the street, but fund those courts so that this state can reap the benefits of the rewards from that, which is saving money. It's more efficient and it has better outcomes. The other thing is that Texas went to that model several years ago, the diversionary model. They shut down 9 correctional facilities, so we have a blueprint for it. 9 correctional facilities save billions of dollars, and violent crime at this point in time is less than it was in 1966. So it's time that we go to a diversionary program. We have those here in Stillwater on the drug side, so I think they're good.
All right, Dr. Grellner, the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education have been progressively encroaching into areas that have traditionally been subject to the control of local school boards, such as what schools may be housed in a school library. They've also been threatening the accreditation status of schools that do not comply with state demands. Do you agree or disagree with this significant shift in practice?
Yeah. Well, I was on the school board for 7 years at Cushing, and I think local control is the best. I think that's how this country's set up. We have federal control, which should be a very little control over us, down to state control, down to county control, and then local control. So I'm not a big fan. I think that schools should reflect the values of the people in the community, and that's how you get that done. There has been some, he's bombastic. There's no doubt, and I don't agree with that. I don't agree with Trump's bombastic, whatever it would be. I'd have to ask you to spell it for me, probably. But I was more of a math guy and a science guy. But, I don't agree with that. And some of this is for political theater, and I think that's unacceptable, okay? With that being said, okay, he did run in the state of Oklahoma. He had 57% of the vote. He was elected by the people. I'm not going to be his boss. She's not going to be his boss. He's an elected official. And he needs to be accountable to the people, and in 2 years he'll get a chance to get rid of him. But I think that there have been strides made in education, and Tulsa Public Schools would be a prime example of that. But I think out here in rural America and out in our communities, education's good, education's being funded, and education is it's very, very good. Cushing's good. So thanks.
All right, Dr. Fuxa.
So our teachers are doing yeoman's work in very difficult conditions, but that's despite the efforts of our state superintendent. He is actively harmful to our children, our economy. Everything about Oklahoma is being harmed by this man. He is actively toxic. I find it difficult to reconcile that my opponent uses the same very partisan talking points that Walters uses on his website, that he has sent money to Ryan Walters, and then he now says it's just a matter of kind of his style. It is not a stylistic issue. This man is overtly attacking our kids and causing harm, increasing bomb threats in our schools by claiming there's pornography there when there is not. Our Republican Attorney General said, tell me anyone in the state of Oklahoma that is doing that, and I will personally prosecute them. 0 cases. This is a rhetorical tool used to attack our public schools because Ryan Walters is part of the privatization machine. He is a cog in that effort that Janet Barisi started in Oklahoma, that they are working to defund public schools to force us to have a 2-tiered system or fully privatize. This is an effort of disinformation against our schools, and I'm really, really tired of hearing that our rural schools are doing fine. They're absolutely not. There is not a single district in the state that hasn't faced direct harm from our teacher exodus, from the overreach of Walters, from his attacks on our educators and threats to our curriculum, trying to control what's in our libraries. I've been very vocal of that we have a process in place in every school district in the state to make sure that kids have appropriate, useful resources to make them think, and we'll continue to do that.
All right, Christy, I'm going to bounce around a little bit just so you're not surprised. Dr. Fuxa, this is for you. The Judicial Nominating Commission was established in 1967 by an amendment to the state constitution in response to a state Supreme Court bribery scandal. The commission, which is designed to minimize partisanship in the judicial nominating process, has been targeted over the last decade by attempts to return partisanship into the process. Do you support retaining the JNC, or would you prefer systemic changes? Dr. Fuxa.
So the reason Governor Stitt wants to oust these judges is because he wants control, because he doesn't like the way they voted on St. Isidore's. There's an effort to fund a private Catholic charter school in the state of Oklahoma. I absolutely support that review board. It was put in place to prevent scandal after a huge political scandal for judges that broke out. So we have to keep that review process in place to protect from that same kind of scandal in the state of Oklahoma. Kevin Stitt has already grabbed too much power in our state. He used the pandemic to gobble up power, and that's why he now gets to appoint the entire State Board of Education with non-educators, I will add, our medical board with mostly non-medical folks to control those to do his bidding. We do not need that with our judiciary. We have a separation of church and state. Public funds need to be in public schools. I grew up Catholic, but I want to make sure that our public dollars stay in public schools to fund our basic services that we need to thrive as a democracy. That's access to the American dream for our kids. That's what drives the economy of Oklahoma alongside our industries of ag and oil and gas. My grandparents were in oil and gas. My husband owns a family farm, but we've got to recognize we don't have to choose between public ed and the industries that drive our economy. So absolutely, we've got to make sure that that judge review process stays in place to protect that separation of church and state that lets us keep our public funds in public schools.
Dr. Grellner.
Yeah, well, it's, the way we do it federally is that the president picks a person, they nominate them, the Senate goes through them, and make sure, and then they qualify them or they vote that they can be placed on the Supreme Court or whatever. And I think that's a good process. There's not a process out there that cannot be messed up. Humanity has that ability, okay? And so the JNC, the way we're doing it now is there's 15 people. They're not accountable to the voters, and 6 of them are attorneys. And so those 6 attorneys, if I'm sitting in a room and somebody says, who's the best judge to pick here, right, to offer to the governor, and I'm a doctor in there, I want to listen to the 6 lawyers, right? Makes sense. They're the experts. And I think that it's reasonable to switch it. If the people decide not to switch it, that's fine, but they do deserve a choice to vote on it, okay? And the other thing is that church and state were divided. The biggest concern was that a church would take over the state government and drive it like we had in Rome and like we had in historical events in a lot of places, and those would go together. But if you have faith, conviction, and you want to say your piece and you want to say it through that, it's okay. That's how the Constitution was set up.
All right, Dr. Grellner. For the second year in a row, the governor has declined federal funds for summer feeding programs for children during a period when they do not have access to the benefits of school nutrition programs. Do you agree or disagree with this decision?
During the time they didn't have access to school?
No, what I'm saying is that in the summertime, they don't have access to school programs.
Right.
So that was the purpose of the summer feeding
Right.
program.
Yeah. Well, and this is on philosophies of government, okay? And the philosophy has to be, do we want to grow government and it take care of all of our needs, or do we as a community want to take care of our own needs? And the fact that he turned down these funds is because there are a ton of strings tied up to all of these funds you have to do. And to implement those funds, it is expensive, but you have to do things that you don't want to do as a state possibly. And so turning down those funds, it stinks. But at the same time, we have a summer, we started that with early COVID, and it's appropriate. But at some point in time, who's in charge of the kids? Is it the families? Is it the state? Because if the state starts taking care of all the needs of our kids, then we're giving up all of our power, okay? And as parents, When we raised ours, I'm in charge of our kids. I'm in charge of their well-being and the decisions that get made for those kids. And so, you know, you know, whether it was a great idea to turn it down or not, I understand why he did.
All right, Dr. Fuxa.
It's not a hard question when we are asked whether children should eat. It's not a difficult question. Our governor turned down those funds, our federal tax dollars, on behalf of Oklahomans. 1 in 5 kids in our state is food insecure. It's not because of their families not caring, it's because they don't yet have the resources they need to do that. It's our obligation as a civilized society to try to make sure that the children in our communities eat, number one. Number two, when we talk about the strings tied to federal funding, of course there are some strings, but those strings also desegregated our schools. There's some benefit from that a lot of the time. I will say in more recent years, our farmers and ranchers stay afloat with federal funds. They operate in many cases on very thin margins. And so when there's a drought, when there's a disease that takes out a whole herd of cattle, when there's a tornado that comes through, it's federal dollars that keep them afloat. And we have to make sure we keep accepting that. In our public schools, it's federal dollars that make sure that kids in poverty have their needs met, that children with special needs have their resources met. It is absolutely essential that we keep bringing home our own federal tax dollars. I'm proud that we live in a nation. Oklahoma contributes a great deal to this country, and I will proudly accept back the dollars that are ours to make sure that our children and our communities have our needs met.
All right, Dr. Fuxa, this actually was alluded to earlier. Competing forces are battling over St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School, which, if ultimately greenlighted by the U.S. Supreme Court, would become the first state-funded religious school in the country. Do you support the use of state tax dollars for this purpose?
This is for me first? Yes. Okay, great. So number one, I want to make sure it's really crystal clear. This is something I've written and made really clear a lot, because we all had those chain emails for a while that were implying that kids couldn't pray in school. Children can pray in school anytime they want, in whatever manner they like. That is a protected First Amendment right. What we cannot do in school is impose our faith on students as teachers, because as a Catholic teacher at that time, it would have been inappropriate for me to say, now let's all say the Hail Mary. Misunderstood prayer, but we can talk about that another day. But that wouldn't have been appropriate to say, now let's all do that, because that's my faith, not those of my students. That separation is what protects every single family's right to share their own faith with their church and their family. That should not be imposed upon people at school. Public schools are for us all. And so that, I think, is the most important point here, but public dollars belong in public school settings. Again, this is another part of the effort alongside our current voucher program that's pulling $700 million over a 3-year period into private school settings with no oversight already, and our governor wants to raise the cap. 55% of those applicants made over $150,000 a year. These are not families that need the support. This is a grift to make sure that we defund our schools. That's a huge problem. And the statistics show that when children move from a public school to a private school, their performance typically drops because they're not always equipped to serve kids in the same way that a public school setting might be. So that separation is essential. I want to keep protecting it.
Dr. Grellner.
Yeah, I think we'll see what the Supreme Court says about it. Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me there? Okay, so I think we need to wait to see what the Supreme Court says about it. Now, let's talk about vouchers, okay? And I had an in-depth conversation with the senator the other day. The voucher programs are given to the parents so they can take their kids to a private school. Those vouchers, the money is not pulled out of the school system, as you've been told. The money is line item back to a different fund that does not affect the schools where these kids are coming out of. And so we hear that $700 million is going to go to private schools. It is, but it's not coming out of our personal schools, okay, or Stillwater, Cushing, or Manford. And so that is a scare tactic if you want to talk about scare tactics. The other thing is there's a recent study, and it came out a week ago, and the LNH, it's a private school set up 10 years ago, and they went back and looked at private schools across the United States, And the money that we're given for these kids to go to these private schools, and for every dollar the state gave, they got $2.71 back. So these private schools are not hurting public school funding, and to say that they are is nothing more than just making everybody think that there's a raid on public schools, but people deserve choice.
All right, we're going to go to the closing statements because we're about out of time. We're going to go 2 minutes on the closes, Christy. Since Dr. Fuxa went first during opening statements, Dr. Grellner will begin the closing statements, and you have 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, we have two different viewpoints, and that's okay. That's what America's about. We can agree. We don't have to scream and holler at each other. We don't have to call each other names. And that's really how this country was set up. But we really don't want to debate anymore in this country. We want to call people and tell them how bad your opponent is. And I got that today on the way home. Or on the way over here, somebody called and said, hey, you're terrible, and they send out terrible flyers on you. I won't do that. It's not worth it to me. I'd rather lose this election doing the right thing and standing on principles than I would to win it. And so if this country is, every time we have a problem, we want to grow government and we want to, spend more money, borrow more money, grow government, and agriculture, all the way down the line, agriculture, education. We need to become somewhat self-sufficient. If we're going to depend on the government for everything, we're going to get in a jam someday. And when the lights don't work because they don't like your ideology at your house, then you're going to figure out that this thing's a bad deal. But it doesn't have to be this way. And so I am saddened by where we're at in this political environment. I think it's toxic to the world, to the people in it, and this is not anything anybody should ever take on unless you are psycho, I think would be the best way. This is not fun, and everybody gets, my faith's been beat up through this whole thing, but she's never brought up her faith. So it's hard for me to understand or defend or to compare and contrast faiths, because it's easy to just shoot holes in my faith. And I think we got tremendous opportunity, but I think we have to get our fiscal house in order. And we own $35 trillion in this world, and in the U.S. it's unacceptable.
All right, Dr. Fuxa, you have 2 minutes.
I've repeatedly said that I'm very concerned about the very distorted version of Christianity, which is my faith, being pushed on our children from Ryan Walters. And we need to tell the truth about who we are. A couple weeks ago, you were not a big voucher guy. Today, you're very in support of school choice. And so we have to make sure we're honest about where we stand. I've been consistent in my messaging, and I've shown up in every community across this district. I am committed to serving. I find joy in serving. If you fundamentally do not believe that government can be a help to people, you probably should not enter it. So I think that's a concern. I have to go back to the budget. I'm going to use a moment because we have a set budget in Oklahoma. We cannot go into debt. It does pull funding from our public schools, our voucher system, that my opponent may or may not support. So that's a huge concern. But I'm excited to serve. I've been preparing for this for years. We had saved to make this possible, we thought, when I retired. But then Ryan Walters came along, and I don't know that we'll have public schools as we know them. So I was compelled to leave a job that I love to go and do this work. And it has been such a joy to knock on doors and say, what are your hopes or concerns for our state? And to hear those and to be able to go to the Capitol and put them into place. We have a duty to serve. My dad served in Vietnam. His dad served in the Battle of the Bulge. I'm excited to find out how I can do my best for my community. And I hope to earn your vote November 5th.
All right, thank you both for being here today. The election is 7 a.m. The election is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Tuesday, November 5 at your assigned polling locations, with early voting 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Wednesday, October 30 through Friday, November 1, and 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Saturday. That'll be at the Stillwater Public Library here and at the Cushing Chamber of Commerce over there. The candidates will be available for a few minutes at the conclusion of our meeting, and thank you very much.